She was standing there in the courtroom, tears streaming down her face, calling me a monster in front of everyone. What no one in that room knew, and what even she'd forgotten, was that our daughter had been recording every single word. I'd been betrayed by my wife, dragged into court, and painted as a man too unstable to raise his own child. But I stayed quiet, because in a world built on lies, silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's the sharpest weapon you've got. If you've ever had to fight for the truth quietly, or protect someone you love when nobody believed you, then you already know how it feels. If that's you, share your story. Your voice might just keep somebody else from feeling alone. My name's Ethan Cole. I'm 43 years old, and this is how I used every skill the Army ever taught me. Not to survive a war overseas, but to protect my daughter from betrayal right here at home. The first sign was small. Lena started flipping her phone face down at dinner. At first, I didn't think much of it, just a little habit maybe, but then it happened again. And again, every night for nearly 2 weeks. Then came the late nights at the office, the long meetings, the showers right after getting home, though she'd already showered that morning. It wasn't just her behavior that changed, it was her whole energy. She was distant, cold, like her mind was somewhere far away from the home we built together. I'd spent years in military intelligence, trained to notice patterns, to study people, to see what others missed. Civilian life never dulled those instincts. So I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse. I just observed, listened, waited. When Lena told me she had a court hearing that got delayed, something didn't sit right. I checked our credit card statements. There it was, a charge for dinner for 2. Not near any courthouse, not during business hours. I called the restaurant, pretending to confirm a reservation, and sure enough, they had a table for 2 under the name Holt. That name would soon mean more than I wanted it to. Over the next 48 hours, I connected the dots. Hotel reservations. Duplicate calendar entries. 2 lipstick-stained wine glasses in the dishwasher, even though only 1 bottle had been opened. And finally, a name, Gavin Holt. A real estate developer. Twice divorced. A man known for his expensive apartments and even more expensive taste in women. The kind of guy who used money and charm like twin weapons. I'd never met him, but his digital fingerprints were everywhere. Lena wasn't his first affair, and she sure wouldn't be his last. But she wasn't just another name on his list. To me, she was my wife. And that made it personal. One rainy Thursday, I came home early. The house was quiet. Lena's car sat in the driveway. Another car, a black Mercedes, was parked a few spaces over. Inside, the lights were dim. Soft jazz drifted from the living room speakers, and a pair of polished men's shoes sat abandoned near the door. I didn't say a word. Years of training had taught me that silence could do more damage than shouting ever could. I took out my phone, pressed record, and moved upstairs as quietly as a ghost. The bedroom door was cracked open. I heard voices, laughter, and then the kind of sounds that told me everything I needed to know. I stood there for a moment, long enough to let the truth sink in, and then I walked away. Downstairs I waited, calm, controlled. An hour later, they came down, both fully dressed, but the air around them was thick with guilt and arrogance. Lena froze when she saw me, her face drained of color. Gavin just smirked, like it was some twisted sitcom moment. "Well," he said, "I didn't expect you home so soon. Guess some women need more than a weekend warrior can offer." I looked him dead in the eyes. No anger, no emotion, just purpose. "You've got no idea what I'm capable of, Gavin," I told him. "But you will." Lena tried to speak, but I was already walking out into the rain. Cold drops hit my skin like sparks of electricity. My pulse stayed steady. My hands didn't shake. That wasn't the moment I lost everything. That was the moment I decided not to lose control. Because I don't go to war without a plan. And that night, I started a new one. By Monday morning, Lena had hired Richard Hoffman, a bulldog of a family lawyer, famous in Connecticut for his theatrics and scorched earth tactics. He didn't believe in compromise. He believed in destruction. And his target was me. Their goal was simple: destroy my credibility. They twisted my military background into ammunition, turning my training in interrogation and observation into evidence of obsession. In their version of the story, I was a man haunted by war, too broken to separate battle from home life, a ticking bomb behind medals and discipline. Within a week, the court filings were full of accusations. Lena claimed I'd been monitoring her for years, spying on her phone, hacking her email, manipulating our daughter emotionally. She said she feared for Sophie's safety, that with my combat skills, I might snap, take our daughter, and vanish. It was a carefully rehearsed act. Every question, every tear, every tremor planned to perfection. And there, right behind her during testimony, sat Gavin Holt. To an outsider, he might have looked like a supportive boyfriend. But to me, it was theater. They were putting on a show, trying to bury me under the same skills I'd once been honored for. So I sat there in silence, watching the woman I loved turn me into a villain. Her voice cracked in all the right places, painting me as cold, unpredictable, emotionally distant. And I realized they weren't just fighting for custody. They were fighting to erase who I was. She stood there on the witness stand, talking about coded conversations, military routines, and psychological games. The courtroom hung onto every word. Some people nodded along. Others looked at me like they weren't sure what to believe. But I didn't flinch. Not once. When Hoffman, her lawyer, took over, the attacks got sharper. He presented fake timelines, suggesting I'd been following Lena long before she started her affair. He painted my cybersecurity work as something dark and obsessive, blurring the line between my job and my personal life. To them, I was a soldier who never came home from the battlefield, a man who saw danger in every corner, a husband who treated his own wife like an enemy combatant. They flashed evidence on a projector, text messages I never sent, edited voicemails that made it sound like I'd tracked Lena's every move. They even showed a photo of one of my old military notepads, claiming the notes inside were tactical plans tied to her schedule. It was ridiculous, but it worked because fear always does. They played on the public's unease about people like me, veterans who'd seen too much, done too much, and come back quieter than most. Still, I said nothing. Not in court, not in depositions, not even to my own lawyer. Because I wasn't building a defense. I was building something far stronger. While Lena and Hoffman turned truth into theater, I started working in silence. Methodical, focused, controlled. I began recording everything. Not just their affair, but the way they planned to frame me. I captured late-night whispers between Lena and Gavin, plotting how to provoke me, how to make me look dangerous. I had clips of Lena coaching our daughter, Sophie, on what to say if a social worker ever asked about me. I even had audio of Gavin laughing about how easy it is to turn the courts against a military guy. They thought I was broken. They thought I was blind. They had no idea I'd been watching them the whole time. Inside my small apartment, surrounded by screens and notes, I pieced together everything they threw at me. Each false accusation became a weapon in my own arsenal. Each public attack turned into private leverage. Lena didn't realize it yet, but she was laying the groundwork for her own downfall. And Gavin, cocky, arrogant, too sure of himself, was hammering in the nails. I lived by one rule: never react emotionally. That's how they win. And I wasn't about to hand them that victory. I wasn't the man they tried to make me out to be in court. I was something much worse for them: patient, disciplined, and ready for war. So while they shouted, I planned. While they lied, I prepared. And when the time came, I started my counterattack. The first target was Gavin. I created 3 fake online identities, each one carefully built to look like an international real estate investor. They had everything: realistic LinkedIn profiles, industry articles, connections, even gossip about big property deals. Then I baited the hook. Each investor reached out to Gavin with an irresistible offer: a $50 million luxury development project. The messages were flattering, feeding his ego. They called him a visionary, said his portfolio was unmatched, and that they'd been watching his rise in the market. It didn't take long. Gavin took the bait like it was his last meal. He shifted all his focus from real clients to chasing this dream project I'd invented. He poured money into creating fake architectural renderings, paid for meetings with planners, even took out loans to fund what he thought was a massive expansion. And I watched every step, every email, every negotiation, every delusion, until he was neck-deep in debt and lies of his own making. Then I turned my attention to Lena. Her weakness was never hard to find. She craved validation, recognition. She wanted to be seen as a rising star in the legal world. So I gave her exactly what she wanted. Using a few of my anonymous identities, I nominated her for awards she'd never heard of. I sent fake interview requests from made-up legal magazines. I even arranged inquiries from a supposed Manhattan firm asking if she'd be interested in a partnership. And she fell for it instantly. Overnight, she started acting like the next big name in law. She took on high-profile cases way beyond her skill level. She spent thousands on designer suits, redecorated her office, and invested in PR she couldn't afford. She began promising clients things she couldn't deliver. And slowly, her professional image started to crack. Cracks I documented carefully. Emails, phone calls, court filings, all of it. But my real masterpiece was turning them against each other. Using what I'd gathered from Lena's devices and Gavin's messages, I planted just enough evidence to make them doubt each other. A private investigator's business card left in Gavin's car. A few emails hinting that Lena had been buying spyware. Anonymous notes implying that Lena had leaked Gavin's financial info. Then I flipped it, fabricated text messages from Gavin that suggested he'd been photographing Lena's legal documents. The result? Chaos. Lena found the PI's card and panicked. Gavin discovered the leaks and went into a spiral of paranoia. They confronted each other, both lying, both too scared to tell the truth. She started hiding her phone. He changed his passwords, and the little alliance they'd built on deceit began to crumble under the weight of their own distrust. Lena started wondering if Gavin was using her for information about my past. Gavin, in turn, began to suspect she was manipulating him for money, planning to dump him after her divorce settlement. I didn't need to interfere anymore. Their silence toward each other was punishment enough. Meanwhile, Sophie spent her weekends with me. I stayed the steady parent, the one who helped with her homework, flipped pancakes on Sundays, and read bedtime stories at night. I made sure she never saw the war being fought just miles away from home. While I quietly gathered evidence, Lena and Gavin still believed they were winning. They didn't realize they were moving through a maze I'd built for them, one careful, deliberate step at a time. Every argument they had was calculated. Every doubt was placed. Every lie they told was one I'd let them believe. And when they finally looked around, the walls had already closed in. From the quiet of my apartment, I sat behind 3 monitors and a single camera lens. I tracked everything, their calls, their texts, the slow unraveling of their relationship. Each hour, the cracks grew wider. Lena and Gavin were destroying each other, and I made sure every second of it was recorded, archived, and time-stamped. Gavin's desperation started leaking through everything. His emails, his business messages, even his GPS history that showed him driving late at night to construction sites that didn't exist. I watched it all unfold with the precision of someone trained to study human weakness. From my screen, I saw Lena pacing outside at 2 in the morning, yelling into her phone. I heard Gavin screaming at a contractor who'd just backed out of another doomed deal. One night, Lena smashed a glass vase during an argument, whispering through tears that nothing in her life was working anymore. Gavin stormed out, calling her a whore on his way to the car. Their perfect little world, the one they'd built on the ruins of mine, was collapsing. And it wasn't because I sabotaged them. It was because of their own stress, their suspicion, and their greed. Then came the breaking point. Gavin's fake real estate project bled him dry. He'd overextended his loans, maxed out his credit, and now the banks were circling, ready to seize 2 of his real properties. Desperate, he turned to Lena for money. He called it a temporary loan, promising he'd pay her back once the deal went through. But Lena, already buried under professional failures and growing panic, didn't see it that way. She thought he was trying to buy her silence. When she found documents in his bag, papers that hinted at foreign accounts and power of attorney forms she didn't recognize, she snapped. She called the police, claiming Gavin was trying to take over her assets. That evening, when Gavin came home, she met him at the door. The fight that followed was chaos, raw, furious, and deafening. Lena hurled accusations, some real, most born from paranoia. Gavin yelled back, saying she'd only used him to destroy me. He shouted that everything she had was built on lies. She fired back, accusing him of stealing client files and taking photos of her confidential casework. Neither of them had proof. Neither of them knew that I already had all the proof I'd ever need. Every word of that argument captured by a high-end mic I'd hidden behind a vent in the hallway. By the time the police arrived, the shouting had stopped, but the damage was done. They took statements. No arrests, no charges. Just a domestic disturbance logged into the public system. I pulled the report an hour later and added it to my archive. Date, time, and full transcript. It was another piece of evidence. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply documented the moment. Gavin Holt had officially hit bottom. Lena Cole was unraveling. And I, ever the soldier, hadn't fired a single shot. No lawsuits. No confrontations. Just silence, patience, and proof. My weapon wasn't anger. It was precision, recording, patience. And now, with a folder full of audio, video, documents, and sworn statements, I had everything I needed, not to destroy them, but to let them destroy themselves. All I had to do was wait. And that moment came sooner than I expected. The courtroom was packed the morning it all came to a head. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, catching dust in the air like smoke after a battle. I sat perfectly still at the defense table, hands folded, face calm. My lawyer, Patricia Mills, didn't say much through the trial. She didn't have to. Lena took the stand next to Hoffman, her attorney. Her eyes glistened with tears, her voice trembling in all the right places. She spoke about fear, confusion, and how I'd become a stranger to her. She called me cold, methodical, emotionally distant, a man whose discipline had turned into obsession. She said I'd learned to control people like I controlled missions, that I'd used our daughter, Sophie, as a pawn in some twisted emotional campaign. Hoffman ate it up. He paced in front of the jury like a showman, talking about the invisible dangers of veterans like me, men conditioned by years of covert operations. He spoke about PTSD, behavioral fixation, and my so-called need to control every environment I entered. He told the court that Sophie wasn't safe living with a man who saw everyone as a potential threat. When Lena stepped down, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Caroline Porter flipped through her notes, slowly nodding. Then she looked at our table. "Mrs. Mills," she said, "does the defense have anything to present?" Patricia rose from her seat, voice low and deliberate. "Your Honor," she said, "my client believes someone else would like to speak on his behalf." Judge Porter frowned slightly. "Excuse me." Patricia nodded toward the gallery. "His daughter, Sophie Cole, has asked to address the court." Hoffman immediately jumped up. "Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. That child has been manipulated for months." Judge Porter raised a hand, cutting him off. "I'll decide what's appropriate, Mr. Hoffman." Then she turned her eyes toward Sophie. "Miss Cole, would you like to speak?" My little girl stood from the front row, 9 years old, small but steady. She held her tablet tight between her hands and walked to the front. I didn't move, didn't speak, but my eyes followed her every step. "Yes, Your Honor," she said softly. "I have something to show you." The entire courtroom went silent. Sophie approached the bench and handed the judge the tablet. She tapped the screen once, then stepped back. A recording started to play, echoing through the courtroom speakers. It began with a child's voice, hers. "Mommy, why do you always cry when you come back from Uncle Gavin's?" Lena's voice followed, quiet but tense. "I'm not crying, honey. Mommy's just tired." "But Uncle Gavin makes you sad," Sophie said. "And he's mean to Daddy." Silence. Then Sophie again. "Yesterday, I heard you tell Uncle Gavin that you'd make sure Daddy can't see me anymore, even if you have to lie and say he hurt us." Lena's voice came back, sharp now, controlled. "Sophie, you shouldn't listen to adults." "But Mommy," Sophie said, her voice calm, innocent, "why would you lie?" Another pause. Then Lena's voice, cool, detached, deliberate. "Sometimes we have to say things that aren't entirely true to protect the people we love. You'll understand when you're older." And then Sophie's final words, steady and heartbreakingly simple. "But Daddy says lies are always bad. Even when it's hard, we should tell the truth." She froze completely. No whisper, no movement. Only the sound of her own voice echoing through the courtroom. While the recording played, Lena could be heard coaching Sophie, rehearsing her answers for the court-appointed psychologist, planning with Gavin how to make Ethan look dangerous. Then her tone changed, sharp, calculating, commanding. "If we play the victim right, it'll work. The judge will think it's unbalanced. We just need a few convincing tears. The rest will take care of itself." The playback ended. Silence gripped the courtroom. No one dared to move. Lena sat pale, motionless, her eyes wide and empty. Hoffman looked like he'd been punched in the chest. Judge Porter slowly turned towards Sophie. Where did you get that, young lady? Sophie's voice was small but steady. I recorded it on my tablet. Dad told me if someone does something wrong, you keep proof. He said the truth always wins, if you're patient enough. The judge leaned forward. How long have you been doing this? Since Mom started acting different. Since she started lying about Dad. Lena stood abruptly, her voice cracking. Your Honor, she's been trained. This isn't real. Judge Porter raised a hand. Please sit down, Mrs. Cole. Then, turning gently to Sophie. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the court? Sophie finally looked at her mother. I love you, Mom, but I can't live with someone who lies. Dad never lies. He tells me the truth, even when it hurts. She walked back to her seat. Ethan reached out and placed his hand lightly on her shoulder. For the first time since the trial began, Judge Porter looked at him not with suspicion, but with respect. A storm had come and gone, and Ethan never flinched. His daughter had brought the truth into the light. The courtroom stayed utterly still. Lena's testimony, her polished lies, her crafted emotion, now played against her own voice, recorded by her child. That small, steady voice saying, "But Dad says lies are always bad," cut through the room harder than any cross-examination. Lena was frozen, unable to speak. Her face had gone white. She didn't look at the judge, or at Hoffman, or even at Sophie. Her eyes were locked on Ethan, and what she saw wasn't triumph or anger. It was calm, cold, immovable calm. He'd never tried to destroy her. He'd simply prepared for this moment with unshakable patience. Hoffman turned to Lena, horror spreading across his face. Everything he'd built his case on now lay in ruins. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. There was nothing to say. He gathered his papers silently, and that silence said more than any argument ever could. Judge Porter finally spoke, her tone transformed. I hereby grant full legal and physical custody of Sophie Cole to her father, effective immediately. The defendant is acquitted of all allegations. The evidence presented today raises grave concerns about bias, witness manipulation, and parental alienation. This court will not tolerate the use of a child as a weapon. Lena swayed in her seat, barely conscious. Your Honor, please. Sophie doesn't understand what she's doing. She's just a child. Sit down, Mrs. Cole. Judge Porter interrupted firmly. You're no longer speaking as a mother. You're speaking as a defendant under investigation. I suggest you consult your attorney before saying anything further. Lena sank into her chair. The polished image she'd built, the calm, controlled mother, was gone. All that remained was a woman trapped in her own lies, falling apart breath by breath. Sophie sat quietly beside Ethan, hands folded around the tablet that had dismantled an entire case. Ethan placed his hand on her shoulder once more. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The message was already clear. When the hearing ended, the gallery emptied in stunned silence. Ethan and Sophie stayed seated until the court clerk approached. Mr. Cole, the judge requests a short meeting with the prosecutor to finalize the custody transfer. It won't take long. Ethan nodded his thanks. As they left the courtroom, Lena was surrounded by officers in the back. Her eyes followed them, but she didn't yell. She didn't plead. For the first time, there was nothing left to manipulate. Outside, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds. Ethan knelt beside Sophie, his expression soft for the first time in weeks. You know you didn't have to do that, right? Sophie looked down. I know. I would have found another way, he said quietly. I'd never ask you to carry something that heavy. Sophie met his eyes, calm and certain. You taught me that we protect our family, Dad. I just did what you do. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, not as a child anymore, but as someone strong. Someone who could stand through storms. Someone who'd inherited not just his discipline, but his sense of right and wrong. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. I'm proud of you, Sophie. Not just for helping me, but for knowing what's right, even when it's hard. She smiled faintly. You always say truth is like water. It might take time, but it always finds a way. Ethan stood and took her hand as they walked down the courthouse steps. Reporters waited by the sidewalk, unsure whether to approach. He didn't stop. He didn't need to. The war was never about public approval. It was always about protecting what mattered. And in the end, the only voice that ever needed to be heard was Sophie's. And the truth, quietly, patiently, won. The days following the custody hearing felt like the closing act of a play that had been written long before anyone knew how it would end. Gavin Holt was the first to fall. News of his fake $50 million real estate deal spread through investors and clients like wildfire. His accounts were frozen, his credibility gone overnight. By the end of the week, Gavin was arrested and charged with fraud and embezzlement. The arrogance that once filled every room he entered collapsed into quiet desperation. Lena's downfall came just as swiftly. The courtroom recording, the one where her own voice betrayed her, became part of the public record. The state bar filed a disciplinary motion. She was suspended immediately, and within weeks, formally charged with misconduct and perjury. Her once flawless career unraveled faster than she could breathe. But the harshest punishment wasn't legal. It was Sophie's silence. Lena tried calling, texting, reaching out in every way she could, but Sophie wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be. Some kinds of broken trust never heal. Ethan didn't celebrate their collapse. He never had to. Their greed, their deceit, their arrogance had already done the work for him. He simply stood at the edge and let gravity do what it always does. His satisfaction didn't come from watching them fall. It came from knowing Sophie was finally safe, protected, free from the chaos they'd built around her. That evening, driving home under a sky washed clean by rain, Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. Sophie sat in the back seat, her tablet resting on her knees, staring quietly out the window. The storm had passed, but the weight of what they'd endured still lingered. He reached back, gently taking her hand. "Everything's okay now, kid." She nodded. "I guess so. It's just weird. I feel like we won, but I'm still sad." Ethan understood. Victories like this were never pure. They came tangled with loss and scar tissue. "It's okay to be sad, Sophie," he said softly. "Sometimes winning doesn't mean being happy. It just means you survived. And you did more than that. You told the truth. That's worth everything." Sophie gave him a faint smile. "Dad, yeah. You didn't have to fight them the way you did you?" He kept his eyes on the road. "I had to protect you. That's all that ever mattered." She nodded, satisfied, then leaned her head against the window. Ethan caught his reflection in the glass, and for the first time in months, he felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. Later that night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone on the porch beneath a cold, quiet sky. For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe without tension. His thoughts drifted back to his years in the military, the lessons that had shaped him: patience, discipline, strategy. They had followed him home. But this time, they hadn't served war, they had served justice. He hadn't needed a weapon. He hadn't needed to shout or strike back. All he needed was time, truth, and the quiet resolve to see it through. Lena and Gavin had written their own downfall. He'd simply handed them the rope and stepped aside. The message was clear. Truth doesn't need violence. It doesn't shout or demand attention. It waits. It watches. And when the moment comes, it wins. Because lies always collapse under their own weight. Ethan knew this chapter was over, but the lessons would remain. Sophie would grow up knowing what it meant to protect what mattered, to stand for honesty, even when it hurt. She had already shown more courage than most adults he'd ever known. As he finished his coffee and looked up at the stars, one last thought settled in his mind. Lena and Gavin had thought they were playing chess. They believed they were clever, moving pieces against a man too broken to fight back. But Ethan Cole had never been the king. He'd never been a pawn. He was the player, and they were too arrogant to see the trap.